Well, what a week of surprises. The Teflon Chancellor lost his shine as it emerged his wife is a non-dom and hasn't been paying UK tax on her vast overseas income, a fact even the Prime Minister said he was unaware of. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has been basking in the international spotlight after his surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital yesterday. Is this a reversal of fortune for the two men at the top of government? And what next for the beleaguered Chancellor? Good morning. To discuss all that, I'll be joined by the Minister in charge of policing, Kit Malthouse, amid fresh questions for the Chancellor this morning. How damaged is he by the revelations? Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has been in Kyiv on a surprise visit. We'll be talking to one of President Zelensky's chief advisors. Labour's Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, will be here to discuss tax, Ukraine and plenty more. In the week that the government released its much-delayed energy strategy, the Green Party's Caroline Davies will be here with her verdict. And the Fleabag star Sian Clifford has been telling me about her new drama series, Life After Life, a glossy adaptation of Kate Atkinson's best-selling book.
Thank you for coming.
You suspect the influenza? She was down in London yesterday?
Yes, for the Armistice Day celebrations.
And reviewing the papers, BBC Moscow correspondent Caroline Davies and the Sun political correspondent Natasha Clark. But first, the news with Laxmi Gopal.
Sophie, thank you. Good morning. Boris Johnson has promised 120 armoured vehicles and anti-ship missile systems for Ukraine after meeting President Zelensky in the capital, Kyiv. The Prime Minister is the first leader of a G7 country to travel to the Ukrainian capital for talks since the start of the Russian invasion. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, is calling for an inquiry to find out who leaked details about his wife's tax arrangements. Akshata Murthy has said she will pay UK taxes on her overseas income after a row about her residential status as millions of people face a cost of living crisis. The polls in the French presidential election are now open. The top two of the 12 candidates will face each other in a final vote in 2 weeks. Recent opinion polls show a dramatic fall in President Macron's lead over his main challenger, the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. P&O Ferries says it won't resume services on the Dover to Calais route before Good Friday at the earliest, meaning there could be several more days of disruption. Lorry drivers say goods they are carrying are going down in price because they're being forced to sit in long queues at Dover Port and perishable products are going to waste. Well, that's all from me. The next news is on BBC One at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Sophie.
Thank you very much. Well, let's have a look at the front pages now, and starting with the Sunday Telegraph. Full-scale NATO military force to defend the borders. That's the main story there. The chief of the alliance revealing plans to deploy such a presence sufficient to repel a Russian invasion, it says. The Sunday Times main story focusing on the Chancellor and his wife. Sunak's wife escapes the number 11 Goldfish Bowl. It says that he has moved his family out of Downing Street after the tax furore, and also, of course, a photograph there of the Prime Minister and President Zelensky, brothers in arms, is the headline. And also on the Sunday Times as well, the news that Sajid Javid said that he was a non-dom. We'll be talking about that later. The Mail, Rishi's on the brink, is the headline there. Astonishing claim. It says that the Chancellor broke US immigration law. And also the Mail on Sunday says it reveals the Chancellor's wife's mystery £4 million loan. The Sunday Express focusing on the trip to Kiev. There's Boris Johnson and President Zelensky, and Boris vows unwavering support with £100 million in arms for Ukraine. The Observer, that story there, PM pledges new arms during surprise visit to war-torn Kyiv. It also says that Rishi Sunak's hopes of becoming the Prime Minister are over, according to top Tories. And the Mirror, the Sunday Mirror, and the Sun on Sunday, both focusing on celebrity stories. Corrie Simon quizzed by cops after boozy entry, says the Mirror, and the Sun on Sunday. TV Emily, this is Emily Attack, calls cops over stalker. Well, to review all that, I'm joined by the BBC's Moscow correspondent, Caroline Davies, who's just returned from Russia, and by Natasha Clark, who's the political correspondent for the Sun. Good morning to both of you, and welcome back as well, Carrie.
Thank you.
Natasha, let's start with you and the Telegraph and all these stories focusing on the Prime Minister and that surprise visit yesterday.
Surprise. Really
It really was,
interesting.
wasn't it?
The Ukrainians tweeted out the news. We're not exactly quite sure where Boris was at the time, but usually the way these things work is Number 10 don't tell us anything about where the Prime Minister is or where he's going till the very last minute for security reasons only. And I imagine his top team were having a bit of a stressful day as he made this secret visit to Ukraine. We've known for a while that he's wanted to secretly go there and pledge his support to President Zelensky in person. But yes, this was a bit of a surprise for all of us, and we understand just a small number of Downing Street staff were even aware of the visit.
And he travelled there by train, we now know, because he's tweeted something this morning of him, a message to the Ukrainian railway workers. Yeah,
really, really interesting. And obviously he wants to go and show his support in person. He's made it, his mission to sort of be Zelensky's best mate and pledge, more support. We're giving them more armoured vehicles now. We're giving them more weapons. He really wants to show now. He said yesterday we're in it for the long term. So it doesn't matter how long this war in Russia and Ukraine is going to last. Boris wants to make sure that he's by Zelensky's side through all of this.
And Caroline, you've been watching this very much from the other side. You've been based in Moscow. You were sent there in January before this invasion happened. How much did life in Moscow change in the course of the 3 months that you were there?
It was pretty astonishing, really. So I arrived in early January. The first story we were covering was the Kazakhstan protests. And then very quickly we were into discussions between Russia and NATO. And things just continued in that vein until obviously the end of February when Russia launched what it calls its special military operation. And I think what was really striking when I first got to Russia was that when you'd been in the West, in the UK, the whole conversation had been about the fact that this invasion, some form of military action was imminent. And as soon as you got to Russia, you were very hard pushed to find anyone that really thought that President Putin was going to go into Ukraine. Now, that's not just because, obviously, if you look at the Russian media, they were parroting back what President Putin was saying, which was the fact that they had no intention of invading, but also because even Western journalists based in Moscow couldn't really understand what he would gain from doing it. He was getting quite a lot from the West by just simply surrounding and saying he wasn't going to go in. So it was quite a surprise to everybody that this action did happen.
Did the sanctions, the impact of sanctions, show quite quickly or not?
I think you saw some things on the surface. So you saw things like closed up shops, H&M, McDonald's, Starbucks, things like that. But in terms of a lot of the shop shelves, supermarkets still had plenty of food, that sort of lifestyle, that was still kind of the same, even when I left a couple of weeks ago.
Let's talk about the story that's dominating the papers as well this morning, which is obviously the Chancellor. There's a big piece here in the Sunday Times. It's all over the front pages, obviously, but this piece by Tim Shipman. Tell us what you've read in there.
Rishi Sunak's wife facing some questions, and obviously this is all impacting on the Chancellor, who, let's not forget, was incredibly popular both within the Tory party and the wider public. And he came in to the job before COVID, and he's obviously had a pretty tricky sort of 18 months, 2 years in the job, sort of dealing with furlough and, the fallout from COVID. And now he's got this really, really big job, which is obviously to balance the books and to get the country ready for the next election. And now he's facing all of these incredibly, questions about his wife and their non-dom status and paying tax, where they've paid tax, whether he had a green card, when he gave it back. It's been a pretty bruising week for the Chancellor, and I don't think these questions are going to go away.
And he came to your paper, didn't he? He talked to your political editor, Harry Cole, very quickly and came out fighting.
Exactly, and so that was really interesting. He did an interview with my political editor, Harry Cole, on which went into Thursday, and just 24 hours later, she essentially had decided to U-turn on this whole position and decided actually, I will pay more tax in the UK. It's an incredible turn of events, really, and obviously for the Chancellor, you can see in the way that he was speaking and in the way that he was saying in that interview that this is really personal for him. He feels that this is actually sort of out of the political realms and out of the boundaries, and I think there is some discussion about sort of whether it's fair game to go for someone's wife. But when you are the Chancellor and you are sort of helping to set tax rules, and at the same time as you're raising national insurance for millions of people across the country, there are going to be questions about, rightly, whether his family are paying tax and where they are paying it.
And it's said in the papers today that he has now moved his family out of the goldfish bowl that is Downing Street. Do you have a sense that he could just walk away from this?
It's tricky to know, and obviously he's feeling really bruised by it, and it's clear that he is hurt by sort of the attacks on his wife. It's worth pointing out that the Treasury say that this was a long planned move to move his family away from Downing Street and towards one of their daughter's schools for their final term. That's what they're saying this morning. But yes, the Chancellor obviously considered resigning over the whole national insurance rises last year, and there was a lot of pushback between number 10 and number 11 about that too. Tory MPs are saying, this has really damaged brand Rishi. Shares in Rishi are in free fall at the moment. That's what one of them was saying the other day. It's sort of unclear to say whether dust will sort of land and settle, but this isn't great going into the local elections for the Conservatives. I wouldn't be surprised if Rishi Sunak was again thinking, do I really want the spotlight of being Prime Minister, whether that's just only going to get more intense if he does decide to run for the top job.
Carrie, let's talk about travel. That was your former job,
yes,
transport correspondent at the BBC.
My old brief.
And there are all kinds of problems for people. It's Easter next weekend. There are all kinds of problems for people trying to get away this weekend.
Yeah, so this is one of the sort of first big tests, really, I think, for the travel industry. So, of course, they've been desperate for the ability to be able to get people away, to be able to get people out on holiday. But the issue seems to be that at the moment the staffing just isn't there. And I think, speaking to the industry, they're well aware that this is partly because they had to let go. Thousands of people lost their jobs, tens of thousands. And trying to recruit those people back into the industry is proving quite difficult.
This is footage. This was actually shot by one of our producers on the 1st of April at Manchester Airport. Complete
This is the sort of nightmare scenario that I think people have about the first time that they've gone away again. And obviously this is also the nightmare scenario for the industry. They don't want these sort of images out there because they want people to come back to them. So,
and then the papers today, we've got these images here. Look at the traffic jams at Dover. These are Manchester Airport, Eurostar, people having to wait hours and hours.
Absolutely. And there's fallout as well from COVID too. Of course, people still obviously have COVID. And we know that some of the staffing has been affected by the fact that they've got COVID absences as well. Trying to get security passes for people to be doing some of these jobs, that's also quite difficult. So it seems like there's quite a backlog. And I think the industry are desperate, obviously, to be able to regain some of the losses that are made over the course of the last 2 years. They'll be delighted to see people turning up and wanting to get on planes, but the fact is that at the moment it's looking like it could be a bit of a queue.
Long queues for travelling. And let's just talk as well about, stay on the non-dom issue here, because on the front of the Sunday Times, Sajid Javid has come out very quickly and said that he was a non-dom for, 6 years?
Really interesting, isn't it? He sort of appears to me to sort of be trying to get ahead of any questions that he might be asking. Obviously, we're talking about the Chancellor, we're talking about his status and his wife's status. The question now, we are in a parliamentary recess. Everybody's going to be thinking about what stories they can write this week. Who else in the Cabinet might have had non-dom status? Obviously, Sajid Javid was also the Chancellor as well. So really interesting that he's sort of come out and sort of tried to put all of his cards on the table as well. So I think we'll be seeing some more of that in the days to come.
Focus as well in the papers on cost of living, and John Bird in the Express, I think it is, who has written, he was the founder of The Big Issue, of course, about 30 years ago. He set it up, and warnings here about homelessness and what could happen.
Yes, and also an interview in the Sunday Times as well with Martin Lewis. So again, there's sort of this real focus on what's going to happen to people's livelihoods, people who are at the real sharp end and the sort of increased risk of homelessness, which John Bird is talking about. But Martin Lewis is just talking about the fact that he thinks this is one of the worst situations he's seen in the course of his career, and that he's very worried for people as the cost of living is going up. So clearly these stories are really sort of resonating with people. And then given that we've had these sort of discussions about the Chancellor and his wife, there's been some discussion about whether that's a Westminster bubble story. Well, I think probably quite a lot of the papers will be tying this to the cost of living and seeing whether that makes it feel more relevant for their readers as well.
And let's talk about the fairy tale ending at the Grand National as well yesterday. Where are the photographs of that? Here you are, there you go. And an excuse for a lot of the papers to dig out this picture of the Duchess of Cambridge in her roller skating kit, because there she is with the jockey who won it.
Yes, Sam Wally-Cohen stormed to victory yesterday.
Great story that, wasn't it?
Fantastic story. Great opportunity to use some fantastic pictures of Kate Middleton. Pictured here is charity roller disco. She's good friends with them. There's even the suggestion that he helped get the pair back together when they had their brief split. So yeah, fantastic pictures, and obviously you can see the look on his face. He's actually his apparently last race before he retired. So what a fairy tale ending for him.
What a time to do it. Well, thank you both so much for joining me this morning, Natasha and Carrie. Thank you. Now, we were talking about the surprise visit, the Prime Minister arriving in Kyiv yesterday. We can go to Ukraine now, to the capital Kyiv, and talk to President Zelensky's chief diplomatic advisor Ihor Zhoffa. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
How did this visit come about? Did Boris Johnson ask to come, or did you invite him?
Well, any visit is what is happening now to Ukraine is happening on the invitation of President of Ukraine. But obviously, when Prime Minister Johnson received this invitation, he agreed. So it might be a surprise for you, but it was not a surprise for us. We were preparing for a while. But really, this visit was very timely and very important in terms of war. How important? How much of a difference does it make? Well, you know, we met Prime Minister Johnson just before the war, and we were discussing with him all the potential danger which Russian aggression might have, and Prime Minister was very supportive. Now, when the war is happening, you see that many more leaders are coming to Kyiv to express their support. But all the visits have to be not only the show of support, but something which have a meaning, which have results. And that's where we had results yesterday, because Prime Minister came not empty-handed, and really he discussed with President Zelensky many things in terms of military support, in terms of financial support, in terms of further rebuilding Ukraine when we will win. So it was very timely and helpful. And what he is giving you is, amongst other things, anti-ship missiles. Why are those so important? Because Russia is now trying to capture some major cities from the sea, such as Odessa. They are now firing and shelling the infrastructure of Odessa from the sea, and that's why we really need anti-ship missiles in order to defend the city. Is it a game changer, him offering you those? Because there has been a line drawn between weapons or defensive weapons and attack weapons. Do you see this as a difference? Well, you know, Ukraine needs weapons now. So, yes, we need a defensive weapon in order to protect the country. You see, we're doing more or less fine on the ground. We managed to take back some Russian troops from some areas of Ukraine. But since now south and east of Ukraine are still occupied, and Russia is planning a huge offensive in the east of Ukraine, they want to capture the whole territory on Donbass. They have to capture Kharkiv. So, yes, we need offensive weapon, first of all, defensive weapon, first of all, but really other kinds of weapons are also very important. And will you get those? Do you think the West will give you those? Well, we are talking to the Western countries, and slowly but gradually they are shifting their positions in order to help Ukraine. Because, again, this is what we need. We're doing fine on the ground, and our armed forces are one of the strongest now among, I think, on European armies. But we need equipment, we need air defense systems, we need something to protect our skies. So with this support, we're going to definitely win. Can you win the war without more weapons? Or do you need a lot more? We need a lot more weapons, weapons, and weapons. And let's talk about the terrible images that we saw this week, the missile attack on the train station in Kramatorsk. Do you think that was a deliberate attack on civilians? Is Russia changing its tactics? Absolutely. That's what Russia is doing throughout the last several weeks, because you might remember in the beginning they were telling we're fighting against armed forces, we're hitting on the military infrastructure only. But look what happening starting from the city of Mariupol, when they were shelling, hospitals, drama theater, maternity hospitals. Now these awful images from Kramatorsk. The station Kramatorsk was having absolutely no military objects, no military soldiers. They were just people who were evacuating from Donbass because waiting for this Russian offensive. So there were children, there were women, 52 people died and 5 children among them. So it was deliberate attack, barbaric attack, awful attack of Russian armed forces against Ukrainian civilians only. And that's unfortunately what they are doing, and unfortunately they will be doing more. Do you have any idea at this stage how many Ukrainian civilians have already lost their lives? How many Ukrainian soldiers have died in this conflict? No, I will definitely not tell you the numbers because, unfortunately, the war is going on. And that's up to interests of Russia to prolong this war, to continue this war in order to bring more civilians to death and more Ukrainian armed forces to death. That's why, again, we need the support of West. We need support in terms of sanctions as well to make Russia weaker in terms of economic, because every dollar, every pound, every euro they earn they immediately spend on the military defense, and military defense produces more rockets, more missiles, more planes, more tanks in order to kill Ukrainians.
I think we might be able to see the pictures from yesterday of President Zelensky walking around Kyiv with Boris Johnson. Do you feel now that the capital, Kyiv, is safe for good?
Well, unfortunately, you can expect everything from Russia. And once again, their announcement of withdrawing, and they're actually withdrawing from around the territory of Kyiv, as well as from around the territory of Chernihiv and Sumy, is only the regrouping. So now they are grouping on the east and in the south. But you never know what can happen next.
Are you expecting more leaders like Boris Johnson to come to Kyiv now? How important is it for people in Ukraine to see that?
This is very important. You might saw in the video how ordinary people yesterday just greeted Prime Minister Johnson, saying, I mean, they don't believe their eyes that they see Prime Minister in the cities of Kyiv. So yes, we're planning more leaders to come next week, and that's what President will do. He will meet the leaders in the city, in the capital. He will speak to the foreign parliaments. He will speak over the phone to the foreign leaders. Every visit, every phone call, every act of support counts and brings us to the victory.
Ihor Zhovka, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Many thanks.
Time now for a look at the weather with Thomas Schaffenacker, and I can just see out my window here, Thomas. The sun is certainly shining here for the moment.
Yeah, nice enough afternoon, I think, on the way for many of us. It was certainly a chilly start to the day with a widespread frost, but this coming night it won't be quite as cold. So let's have a look at the outlook then. Dry today, but there is some rain in the forecast for tomorrow. Not everybody is going to get the rain. At the moment, high pressure's just about in charge of the weather across England and Wales, but out towards the west, a low pressure is approaching. And you can see it here across parts of Northern Ireland, maybe bringing a few spits and spots of rain through the early afternoon, but the vast majority of the UK enjoying that decent day with temperatures of around about 10 to 13 degrees. Now tonight the winds will be blowing out of the south or the southeast, and with a lot of cloud and this advancing weather front, we'll see much milder weather conditions. 6 degrees in London, 3 degrees in the lowlands of Scotland, so quite a few degrees higher than last night. Onto the forecast for tomorrow. Now notice where the rain is: southwestern England, Wales, brushing the Irish Sea coasts, getting into Northern Ireland and southwestern Scotland. So I think it's primarily western areas tomorrow that get that splash of rain. Towards the east and the south it should be dry and warmer, 17 degrees Celsius. And I'll stick my neck out for the bank holiday weekend, or the Easter weekend that is, and it's looking dry and bright.
Thomas, how nice. Thank you very much. Now, it has certainly been a torrid week for the Chancellor and his family. It's not so long ago that he was being touted as the next Prime Minister, but the last few days have seen the unravelling of his family finances on the very day that millions of people started paying more tax through his national insurance rise. Well, Simon Jack is here to take us through the facts, the figures and the rapid U-turn.
It must have been an interesting week around the breakfast table in the Sunak household. As the person who sets the tax rules for all of us, the tax arrangements of the Chancellor's own wife have dominated the headlines. Why? Well, Akshata Murthy is rich, very rich. Her father founded the Indian tech giant Infosys, and she owns shares worth nearly £700 million. Last year, she received dividends on those shares of £11.6 million. Now, despite having 3 homes in the UK, if you include Downing Street, she is not resident in the UK for tax purposes. She's a non-dom, which means she doesn't have to pay UK tax on income earned overseas. For Ms Murthy, that non-dom status means she's paid around £2 million a year less in tax than she would have done as a UK citizen. Now, up to about 48 hours ago, the Chancellor said the arrangements of his wife, a private citizen, had nothing to do with his role as Chancellor. It was a part of a campaign, he said. To smear my wife to get at me is awful. But that position has changed. Yesterday afternoon, Ms Murthy issued a rare personal statement, first seen by the BBC, in which she said, "Many feel my status is incompatible with my husband's role as Chancellor." She went on to say, "I understand and appreciate the British sense of fairness." However, she is retaining her non-dom status, and that has future tax implications. It means her family can choose to pay inheritance tax here in the UK at 40% or at 0 in India, which abolished inheritance tax in the 1980s. At current values, that could save her family at least £280 million. Now, this is all perfectly legal. There are thousands of non-DOMs in the UK. It was introduced by Pitt the Younger at the end of the 18th century, and it's been offered to rich people ever since to encourage them to live, work and spend money here in the UK. Nevertheless, it is very uncomfortable for a Chancellor who has final oversight on all tax matters here in the UK, including the rules around non-DOMs. And he's raised overall taxes during the biggest squeeze on UK incomes since the 1950s. Now, there's a further twist in this tale. It's emerged that Mr. Sunak and his wife both held green cards. That's a pass that allows you to live and work in the United States. It requires you to commit to the US as your permanent home. Mr. Sunak held on to this for 18 months after he was appointed the second most powerful politician in another country, this one. And although got no tax breaks, he may have continued to pay taxes to the US government while in office here. So, what does his boss make of all this?
I think it's very important in politics, if you possibly can, to try to keep people's families out of it. What I will say is that Rishi and I are working very hard on a massive long-term British energy security strategy. That's what we're focused on.
And Simon's with me. Full support there?
I thought it was quite interesting, his choice of words there, saying it's keep your family out of it wherever possible. An admission perhaps that sometimes it's not possible to keep your family out of it, and this is one of those moments, particularly if you're setting taxes that one of your own family members isn't paying. Of course, the political stakes are pretty high here. You heard he was flavour of the month during COVID. He spent £400 billion getting us through that and was incredibly popular. Since then, a little bit less popular because he's had to ask for some of that money back. But I think one of the interesting things will be, obviously his wife's now going to pay £2 million extra in income tax. The Treasury would recognise something else. Is that value for money? She'll say, why am I paying this? Well, you're paying it so I can, using some of your fortune to help restore my political fortunes. Is that money well spent? Will his stock rise as a result of that, or will that £2 million in fact not be that value for money?
Simon Jack, thank you very much for explaining all that. Well, joining me now is the Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse. Good morning.
Good morning, Sophie.
Let me ask you first of all, actually, about Ukraine. We were just talking to one of President Zelensky's chief advisors there about the Prime Minister's visit yesterday. Just explain why we have decided to give the Ukrainians these anti-ship weapons now when others haven't.
Well, obviously, it's critical that the Ukrainians retain access to the sea and to their seaports, both for strategic military reasons, but also for economic reasons. You know, they are huge exporters of grain and other products, and so access to the coastline is critical for them for all sorts of reasons. But also it's part of a general stance by the British government that we want to support Ukraine as much as we possibly can with as much defensive weaponry as they need. And we're in constant conversation with them about what their requirements are. So along with the anti-ship missiles, you will know, 120 armoured vehicles, lots of other equipment that is heading their way to help them successfully in some parts of the country push the Russian forces back.
Let's talk about the Chancellor, which is obviously dominating the news this weekend and last week. How surprised were you to find out that the Chancellor's wife is a non-dom and the Chancellor himself had a green card until last year, meaning he was lawfully a permanent resident of the United States?
Well, I wouldn't have expected to know about the arrangements, private tax arrangements or other, of individuals, particularly non-combatants like the Chancellor's wife. I mean, obviously, as you said in your previous piece, they recognised that there was a disconnect perhaps in the British public's understanding of what was appropriate, and they've corrected that situation now for the future.
And were you surprised, though, when you found out?
Well, as I say, I wouldn't have expected it. I wasn't surprised to know that Akshata Murthy had a wide global interest around the world. I would have expected that. And I know, because I was elected at the same time as Rishi, that they'd worked overseas in California together. In fact, I think that's where they first met. And obviously, I knew that she had significant interests in India. You know, she's obviously been a big part of his life for many, many years. They worked together. I suppose, I don't know whether I was surprised or not, really. I wouldn't have expected to know anything more than I did.
But you say that they've corrected it now. Is that an admission that they got it wrong?
Well, I think, as you saw from what I thought was a very dignified statement from Miss Murthy, that she recognised that there was a a sort of sense of fair play that had been offended by her particular tax arrangements. Now, as I understand it, she had decided that she should pay her tax in those territories where her income arose. In the UK, she paid tax on her UK income, in India on her Indian income. We often talk, don't we, about those international companies who should be paying tax in the territory where transactions occur. She recognised that given Rishi's role that was a distraction and it didn't look right, and so she's changed it and regularised it.
Has the Chancellor been naive over this? Shown a poor lack of judgment?
I don't think so particularly. I mean, as I say, these are two individuals who spent much of their working life overseas. They were lucky enough to study in California after lots and lots of hard work to get themselves there. They obviously got jobs there and have moved around the world. He is married to a foreign citizen. Therefore, having interests overseas comes with that territory. I don't think he's necessarily been naive at all, no. And don't forget, this is somebody who over the last couple of years since he's become Chancellor has been catapulted into a kind of maelstrom of economic instability and uncertainty, and has had to really work hard to help keep the country on the straight and narrow.
Yet at the same time,
managed to produce out of almost thin air some of the most fantastic assistance schemes.
Yes, but at the same time, this has all happened in the same week that the Chancellor is telling millions more people or millions of working people to pay more national insurance than they've had to pay, more tax than they've had to pay for 70 years, while everything is getting more expensive, the cost of living crisis. And it comes at the same time that we discover his family had tax arrangements that meant that his wife had to pay, was reducing the tax she was paying. It doesn't look good, does it?
Well, as was said in the statement, right, they recognised that there was it offended against the sense of kind of fair play. And so they've decided to change the situation so that tax will be paid in the UK. But obviously, it's not a brilliant time for it to come out. We're all struggling with the choices in government that we're having to make around the balance between assisting with the cost of living crisis and funding some of those critical services like the NHS that we need to fund, dealing with that backlog as we go forward. And indeed, some of the choices we've made that have affected the cost of living, like supporting Ukraine, which has had an impact on energy and commodity prices.
But
These are difficult equations to juggle.
If this wasn't wrong for the Chancellor and his family to have these sort of arrangements, why has it been changed? The Chancellor came out fighting on Thursday and said that it was his wife's affairs and that, you know, that should be respected. Why has it suddenly changed? Why the dramatic U-turn?
Well, as I say, as I understand it, the Chancellor and his wife complied with the absolute letter of the law where tax is concerned. And the situation that they had was perfectly legal and allowed. However, they have recognised that at this time, and given his particular job, that as Ms Murty said, it offended against a sense of British fair play. And so they've changed the situation. Now, you can ask no more than that. And I thought her statement was very dignified. And I hope that people will appreciate that over the last couple of years, he has been an incredibly committed Chancellor of the Exchequer who has moved heaven and earth to assist the British people to get through an incredibly difficult period.
The Chancellor's wife is still a non-dom, yet they have 3 houses here. They live in taxpayer-funded Downing Street. She sends her children to school. Her husband holds one of the highest elected offices in the land. In what sense isn't she domiciled here?
Well, you'd have to discuss that with her. As I say, the non-domicile status is something that's been around, as you said in your previous piece, or Simon said in his previous piece, for many, many years, centuries, which allows wealthy, successful people to come from across the world and invest here in this country. Now, they obviously met in California, fell in love, came to this country, he got elected. These are not things necessarily you can predict in your life. But
she's also the wife of the Chancellor who makes decisions about non-doms. Should that change then? Should the Chancellor no longer be allowed to do that?
Well, no, and as I think she said in her statement, she recognised that there was a disjoint in his job and his status and her tax arrangements, and so she's changed it. Now, that seems to me a perfectly reasonable and acceptable way to go about these things. I mean, obviously, he is making decisions in the widest sense about the economy, the balance between our spending and our taxing in this country. And he's obviously, I think he's doing a great job at doing that at the moment.
She still won't have to pay inheritance tax here because she keeps her non-dom status. It could save her up to almost £300 million. Should that change? Should she have to pay inheritance tax in the UK?
Well, Sophie, you're sadly, I'm afraid, predicting the demise of an individual, which may or may not happen at some point in the future. That is obviously a matter for her and for them. I can't really comment on her arrangements about what will happen when, I hope, at some long time in the future, well, I hope it doesn't happen soon, she dies. These are things you'll have to discuss with her, I'm afraid.
What about the investigation?
I'm not in a position to comment on her tax arrangements around her inheritance.
What about the investigation that the Chancellor wants into how all this came out? Do you think that will happen? Will the results be made public?
Well, I don't know if he has asked for an investigation. I've seen that in the media this morning, but we have a long-standing arrangement in this country, which is people's tax affairs are private and should be private and not be revealed unless they want them to be revealed. Now, in this circumstance, obviously, it has been distressing and difficult for them as a family. They've made a statement to correct a situation which seemed to be anomalous to lots of people. And, you know, I think he would naturally want to understand how their personal confidential information was accessed. Now, whether there is an investigation or not, I don't know. But, you know, we need to think about the integrity of our tax system, not just for people like Rishi and his wife, but for everybody generally.
We discovered as well this week that he had the US green card until October 2021, last October, meaning he was classed as a permanent resident of the United States. Do you think that's compatible with being a very, very senior member of the government?
Well, obviously, as I understand it, the green card was a hangover from his time working in the United States. And if you work in the US, I think you have to have a green card. Very often, I mean, I haven't been a green card holder myself, so I don't know exactly. But as I understand, well, I think a lot of people just allow their green card to run out. But as I understand it, he made a statement that when he did go to the US as Chancellor of the Exchequer, or as a minister, I think, he asked what he should do, and they said, hand it back, and he did.
Does it make it feel like he was just passing through? I mean, how committed is the Chancellor to his future in the United Kingdom if he has a green card which makes him a permanent resident of the United States?
Well, Sophie, I think that's a pretty rotten insinuation, right? This is a guy who was born in Southampton, brought up in that part of the world, worked his backside off to get where he is, you know, is smart and committed and is put himself forward for public service in the most, you know, committed way he possibly could at a time of turbulence. No one, I think, could fault him for dedication and hard work during the pandemic. He managed to move heaven and earth, as I say, to support the British economy and the people of this country. He's, you know, I'm not sure how much more commitment you want from the guy, but he's thrown everything he's got at some of the intractable problems that we face with some success, I like to think.
There are plenty more questions in the papers this weekend as well. Do you think this is going to stop Rishi Sunak from ever becoming Prime Minister?
Well, we've got a Prime Minister who's doing a cracking job at the moment, so I'm not sure those questions arise for the future, and I'm sure he'll be Prime Minister for many, many years to come. I've worked with Boris Johnson for well over a decade now, and I know he'll be keen to lead the country forward for, as I say, for many years to come.
But what about Rishi Sunak's political future? How much has this damaged him?
Well, look, it's not ideal, but we all, when we sign up to this job, know that there's going to be rough times and smooth times. The key thing is that he remains committed to the job that he's doing, which is to steer the British economy and its people through some very, very difficult and challenging moments. I know that he's doing that with a sense of public service and duty. What happens to him in the future, I think, will be of secondary importance to what happens to the country. I got elected with Rishi at the same time in 2015. I've been deeply, deeply impressed by his ability and commitment ever since, and I hope and believe that will continue.
Kit Malthouse, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Now, a big new bet on nuclear power was at the heart of the government's energy security strategy this week. But my next guest says nuclear power is inflexible, costly and slow and stuck in the 20th century. She says the government's energy plan is a criminally wasted opportunity. Caroline Lucas from the Green Party joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Why are you so against nuclear power?
Because it's simply not a solution that can be fast enough to get us out of the energy crisis that we face right now. Take Hinkley C, for example, the nuclear energy plant that's being built in Somerset right now. It's massively over budget and it's massively late, about 10 years late. So nuclear is very slow, it's hugely costly, and it won't address people's cost of living crisis right now and the energy crisis that we face right now. That's before we even get to the fact that we don't know what to do with the nuclear waste that we're still creating. We haven't found that underground storage capacity that we still need. It is the distraction from what this energy strategy should have been about, which is to have put energy efficiency and energy saving right at its heart. That's what would have made a real difference to people up and down the country. Having a council-led, house-by-house home insulation programme that could really have stopped people's energy bills rocketing because so much energy is going out through the walls, out through the roofs.
Is it not compatible, though, with an energy strategy with more renewables? I mean, the United Nations says that the world's climate objectives will not be met if nuclear technologies are excluded. Why are they wrong?
There are plenty of other academic studies that will show how you can reach net zero fast without using nuclear. As I say, here in the UK, more nuclear power stations would take between 10 and 15 years to come on stream. They are twice the cost of practically any other energy source. They are the only energy technology that have increased in price in recent years. It is simply an irrelevance when we come to what we need to be doing in this country, which is a massive expansion, for example, of onshore wind, which was completely lacking in the government's strategy this week. That's quite extraordinary, given that it's the cheapest form of energy, that it has massive popularity in the country, and yet basically we've got a government held hostage by a handful of its backbenchers who don't think that wind farms are sightly. Well, that is not the way we should be designing our energy policy in this country.
But it's not just staying with nuclear. It's not just the UN that say that. It's the UK's own Climate Change Committee. It's the International Energy Agency. France gets so much of its energy, electricity from nuclear, 70% of it. They've managed to cap their bills at 4%.
But it has cost them a fortune. Yes, they've been doing it for a long time. But right now, if you look at where the UK is, we don't need to use nuclear energy. And it's not just me saying that. There are plenty of academic studies that will say that. The Climate Change Committee, as you mentioned, yes, one of their scenarios does foresee a lot more nuclear, but other scenarios don't. And in fact, no scenario sees 8 new nuclear power stations, which is what the government is suggesting. Let's just look at the record of nuclear. We've only had 1 nuclear power station brought online in the last 16 years. So the fact that we have a Prime Minister who loves big, shiny projects, whether that's Garden Bridges or bridges to Northern Ireland, doesn't actually help the hard graft of insulating every home in Britain, which is what will get our fuel bills down. Can I tell you one other thing about nuclear as well? Because people often say we need nuclear for baseload. We absolutely don't. When it comes to the national grid, the head of the grid himself had said in the past that baseload is an old-fashioned notion. What we need is much more flexible demand. We can have hydrogen that can store energy. Battery technology is coming on in leaps and bounds. Why would you commit people to paying double the price of renewables for an energy source that's not even going to come online for another 15 years?
Let's talk about insulating homes, because that is something, as you say, that needs to be done. There are 28 million UK homes that need doing. How much is it going to cost?
It's going to cost a lot of money, but what we can do is to use public money to leverage some private money as well. The Green Party is calling for a really ambitious scheme of 25 billion a year for 10 years to properly retrofit our homes. And the reason that we have to do that is because this government has failed for so many years in the past. For example, we had what was called the Green Homes Grant. That collapsed after 6 months. The Public Accounts Committee called it a slam dunk failure. It collapsed because the government didn't properly design it.
To do it, do you borrow money? Because, I mean, it's something like £8,000 to retrofit every home, to make every home properly insulated. Do you borrow, and that's a lot when you're doing 28 million homes, do you borrow that money?
Well, there are a whole range of places you can get money from. For example, the first thing the Green Party would do would be to put a windfall tax on the obscene profits of the big energy companies.
That's not going to cover any of it, though, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about £200 billion. That's the figure that we've been given.
Over 10 years. And if we had a windfall tax, that would give us a good start. What we could also do...
A drop in the ocean, but anyway, yes.
What we could also do, yes, I don't have a problem with saying that there would be some borrowing there. And the reason for that is that you would be able to pay that money back through the new tax receipts you would have coming into the economy, because you'd have so many more people working in this sector. So it's been demonstrated that over time, this can more or less pay for itself. Yes, in the short term, you need public money to pump prime it. What they're doing in Lewis Council, which the Greens are a joint administration there, they've come together with 5 other councils. They've pooled their existing council funding for this, £1 billion. That means that they can now roll out free insulation for 40,000 council homes. That's it with the existing budget. What we need is a wartime mobilisation here. So I know we're talking about big amounts of money, but let's remember the context for this discussion. Just this week, we've had the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the big UN report, that is telling us that it is now or never when it comes to getting our emissions down. That means that we need to be on a wartime footing and invest now to save later.
Can I talk to you about Extinction Rebellion? I mean, the protesters they were out here in Oxford Street yesterday. They say they're going to have a week-long protest. They're going to flood the streets with the most roadblocks they've ever done. It's going to cause a lot of disruption to people. Do you support it, or do you think that it is actually counterproductive?
I'm sorry that it's come to this, that this is the only way that people feel that they can make their voices heard. But I think when we're facing literally the Secretary General of the UN saying that we are absolutely at the last point, it's now or never when it comes to climate catastrophe, then absolutely I support peaceful direct action to try to get a government
and it's not
to look at this.
counterproductive.
Some tactics certainly are. I personally, for example, if you're going to try and stop tube trains moving around, I think that's counterproductive. I think being on the streets in London has been shown to be a way of capturing people's imaginations. People have joined those protests who've never protested before, and they're doing it because they know that we have to leave new fossil fuels in the ground. The International Energy Agency says that, the latest IPCC report says that, and yet this government and this energy strategy that we're talking about just now is foreseeing getting out even more oil and gas from the North Sea. That is frankly immoral. As the UN General Secretary said, it is both morally and economically mad.
Caroline Lucas, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Thank you. Now, if you could live life time and time again, would you ever get it right? A new BBC drama poses that very question. Life After Life, based on the novel by Kate Atkinson, is the story of Ursula Todd, who lives and dies many times in the course of the story. I caught up with one of the stars of the series, Sian Clifford, best known for her unforgettable performance as Fleabag's sister. She has been telling me about her central role in Life After Life as the troubled Sylvie, the matriarch of the Todd family.
What if we could come back and live it all over again and again and again?
They're the 2 best words in the English language when you put them together. What if?
Life After Life is about the Todd family, specifically Ursula Todd, and she is born one winter's night in 1910. It's snowing outside.
Life must go on. Have a wonderful time, Bridget.
Come on.
Hasn't there been enough suffering?
Let's go.
I wondered what it was like to film, because, as you say, she's got 20 lives. She dies 20 times in this film, and in the book she dies, I think, even more.
Yeah.
But, you know, doing that, are you just doing literally scene after scene in different scenarios?
Yeah, so every repetition of a scene we did reshoot. It was a completely new scene in the script, so it was absolutely relentless. I did the birthing scenes I did for 2 days, which was really is the centre of the beginning of Ursula's universe, and I really wanted to do it justice, and it's a very powerful moment that we keep returning to.
What kind of character is Sylvie? Because she seems a very warm mother at the very beginning, but later on something happens to Ursula and she just changes dramatically. She becomes very cold.
She can be very cruel, yeah, and Sylvie is at her best when her children are fulfilling the life that she dreamed for them, and when they're not. She really struggles, I think, and I think she's a real victim of her time.
Hey!
No.
Anthony.
No! That is exactly what she asked for.
No, it's not. We want compensation.
Claire?
I've got 2 important meetings and I look like a pencil.
No! Don't blame me for your bad choices. Hair isn't everything.
Wow.
Fleabag was a huge success, wasn't it? Why do you think it was such a hit?
I don't know. That's one of those things that you just, I couldn't possibly say. I mean, I absolutely adore it and think it was the right thing at the right time, and it just seemed to strike a chord, and lucky for us.
That'll be £25, please.
London.
Thanks. And you got a BAFTA for your role in it. You know, wonderful recognition of your work. Would you like to see another series?
I do sort of feel like the story is complete.
Do you?
And I was one of the people that would really wind her up on set of series 2 to, you know, urging her to do another one. You know, I sort of said, oh, come on, can't we just do it? But then, since then, and since seeing how it's come together, I do feel like how she ended that narrative was so brave and actually the absolutely right thing to do. And of course, because she's an artist and she knows what she's doing. And so she was like, no, this is it. And when I saw it, I was just like, yeah, okay.
Sian Clifford, thank you.
Thank you.
Sian Clifford there, and the first episode of Life After Life is at 9 p.m. on Tuesday, the 19th of April, and all episodes are going to be available to stream on BBC iPlayer from then. Now, talking of life after life, my final guest this morning has had a fair few political lives herself. She's been a minister, a backbencher, the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, and now she wants to be the Home Secretary. Labour's Yvette Cooper joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning, Sophie.
First of all, do you applaud the Prime Minister for his visit to Kyiv yesterday?
Yes, I think it was the right thing to do, and it's right for Britain to support Ukraine. We've supported from the start the action that the government has taken to provide military support for Ukraine to be able to defend itself in the face of this appalling illegal war, where we've seen the most terrible atrocities being committed by Putin's troops.
Let's talk about the Chancellor and his wife. We've talked about it a lot already this morning. Why should a woman be under so much scrutiny because of her husband's job?
I think this would be the same if it was the husband of a woman Chancellor as well. In the end, this is about their household and about whether or not they have special tax arrangements at a time when the Chancellor is asking people right across the country to pay so much more in tax. A time when we're at a 70-year high in terms of taxes on working people. Of course, people expect to know that the Chancellor's household is being affected in the same way as everyone else and doesn't have special arrangements which allow them to reduce the tax they pay.
You've asked for the Chancellor to show full transparency. Do you want him to open his books now and publish all his family's tax affairs?
I think there's a whole series of questions now that they need to answer, including around whether or not they benefited from tax havens. That's been some of the reports that have been made now. Also about whether or not it was declared when the Chancellor was taking policy decisions that were affecting non-dom households, and about the way in which those tax arrangements have been made. There've also, I think, some questions still about the fact that he's had a US permanent residence card. That's what a green card is called, a US permanent residence card, for so many years at the same time as being a Member of Parliament and a member of the British government. So I think the lack of transparency does raise questions about conflict of interest, but also it's about basic fairness. And I don't think the Chancellor still gets that, and that raises real questions about his judgment.
But tax status is usually private, isn't it? Should all Cabinet and shadow Cabinet ministers and their spouses have to publish full tax details?
I think that we've always, as you said, had private arrangements around taxes, but there are some things that are actually just about morals and ethics. Previous Chancellors, I think, have sorted out arrangements to make sure that they don't have conflicts of interest and to not have things being transparently declared. So there's a real question about conflict of interest, and also to just think it was morally okay for them to have tax arrangements in place that meant that they had special arrangements that 99.9% of the country don't have at a time when everybody is being asked to pay so much more. And I think that's the problem. I mean, they do obviously...
But the bottom line of this is they haven't broken any rules, have they?
That's true. So this is lawful, but the question is whether it's ethical. And the fact that they have changed their tax arrangements now show that they do recognise it's a problem, but they wouldn't have done that if this hadn't been public. And that's why I just do not understand the Chancellor's decision making on this. I do not understand how Rishi Sunak could think it was fair for them to have one set of arrangements for their household that ended up allowing them
because
to
it's within the
reduce
rules,
taxes.
isn't it? It is in the rules. They're not breaking any laws.
The Chancellor is asking other people to pay so much more in tax. We've had 15 Conservative tax rises over the last few years under Rishi Sunak, and right now we've got a cost of living crisis going on where people are thousands of pounds worse off, and I don't know how some people are going to manage through the next few months. At that time, you've got to make sure that the person who is making those decisions is being fair about it.
This could have been very different, actually, couldn't it? Because back in 2008, when you were Chief Secretary of the Treasury, you actually had a chance to make the rules on non-DOMs much tougher. They would have had to reveal all the details of their overseas earnings, and you decided not to. You went back on that. Why? Do you regret it?
So we did make some tightening of the rules. So there was a debate Alistair Darling was involved in at that time, and there were some tightening of the rules around non-DOMs. In the 2015 election, we also went further and proposed further restrictions at that point.
Back in 2008, you said that you didn't want to snoop on non-DOMs. Why has that changed now? You didn't want them to have to disclose all their financial affairs.
So we're not saying that the individuals should all have to disclose all financial affairs. What we're saying is that the Chancellor should have some responsibility when he's making decisions about his own household, just as he has responsibility about decisions across the country. Now, Rachel Reeves has announced a review more widely of all kinds of tax exemptions, and that is underway at the moment.
But given what we know now,
given what we know now, do you individual decisions that the Chancellor is taking?
But given what we know now, do you regret not making the rules tougher back in 2008?
Well, those were the decisions that Alistair took at the time, in the particular circumstances at the time. But even by 2015, we were proposing that there should be stronger arrangements in place. So we have called for stronger rules to be in place.
Would you scrap non-DOM status as a Labour government?
Well, that's why I said Rachel has a review underway at the moment,
and do you think
looking into all of the exemptions. I'll let Rachel report back on her review because she's the Shadow Chancellor. But none of this gets away from this Chancellor's personal responsibility. He is putting taxes up in the middle of a cost of living crisis when people are already seeing bills go up, energy bills go up, and he's increasing taxes at the same time. You can't do something unfair at the same time.
I'm interested in what you would do with non-DOMs, because it was Labour policy, wasn't it, to scrap non-DOMs under Ed Miliband, under Jeremy Corbyn. Would you scrap them now?
I know, and I understand you're asking that, and that's why I've said Rachel has a review underway at the moment.
So
I'm sure she will report back on what she thinks now is the right thing to do on this. But as you say, we have previously not only tightened the rules when we were in government, but also proposed going further when we were in opposition as well. So Rachel set out the response to her review that's not just looking at this, not just looking at non-DOMs, but also looking much more widely at tax exemptions, because we think the system should be fair, and at the moment it is not fair.
But it does sound like you're hesitating. It does sound like you're changing. It does sound like you're changing your policy, that you are moving away from this idea of scrapping it completely.
Actually, I'm not. I'm just saying that Rachel has a review underway.
Can I talk about Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees?
Yeah.
The Home Secretary has apologised for the speed at which, or the lack of speed at which, these visas are going through. Labour's leader of Wales, Mark Drakeford, he wants to let Ukrainians come here without any visas, drop it completely. Do you agree with that?
Well, we think you should have the security checks, but you can do those really quickly. The situation we've got at the moment is a total nightmare. There's huge amounts of bureaucracy and huge long delays.
But why do you need the security checks? Let me just finish that point. But he says you don't, and he is very keen to let people in, like the EU is doing, like Ireland is doing. Why do we need the security checks?
Sure.
These are women and children fleeing war.
And let me address that. But let me just first of all, the situation you've got with the Homes for Ukraine's visas is we had 4 weeks ago, hundreds of thousands of people across, 200,000 people across Britain came forward and offered homes. Only 1,200 people have arrived. So that is less than 1% of those who offered their homes. This is totally shameful. If you think how long this war has been going on for now, and the Home Office still hasn't sorted these basic things out, there's still multiple weeks of delays. Now, the security checks can be done straight away. ministers and officials have accepted they can be done within hours, if not on the spots. They're electronic checks. So
and
we think you could do those.
You do think there's security checks, but I'm just interested in whether they're needed or not. You really think that they are needed?
You can do
you
those.
think they're needed?
Yeah,
whether
we
you can
think
do
they're
them?
sensible. You think
Why?
yes, because it's just sensible. You can do them, and they don't
But
delay anybody
why
coming.
Is it sensible?
You don't delay anybody coming by doing basic security checks and by being able to make sure, for example, that you don't have some of the problems that we've seen at the margins, but which are still serious, around human trafficking, around exploitation. Of course, you have to make sure that doesn't happen. But we can do that. The point is you can get rid of the massive additional delays. At the moment, people being asked to prove where did they live on January the 1st, and they're having to do that. You could get rid of that bureaucracy. Priti Patel has refused to do so. I don't know what the point is of Priti Patel's Home Office. Crime's going up, prosecutions are going down,
need to leave it
and visas are being denied.
We've run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thanks to all my guests. We're off air next Sunday, Easter, but we will be back in 2 weeks' time on the 24th of April. My guests then will include Matthew McFadden and Kelly MacDonald, who are going to be talking about their new World War II thriller, Operation Mincemeat. Until then, goodbye.